So in 1979, I was 4 going on 5. And I wasn't in Standard 1 yet, which meant that I was at home for lunch. I was at home at lunchtime. And my nanny, Shosho, she was called Shosho, sometimes I'd have lunch with her and her husband. They lived on our property. And, she'd make like ugali and sukuma with sukuma stew with the most amazing meat. Or she'd make chapatis that were really thick, they were like parathas, so you could just peel layers off of these chapatis. And I just loved hanging out with them, if that was what was going to happen that day. So I'd have lunch, and then I'd either nap, or if I could, I'd play. And my parents were at work, my siblings were in school. And I loved playing outside. I loved the freedom of being outside, outdoors. And in those days, before climate change and urbanization and all of this, you could be in the garden and come across a hedgehog or chameleons. And, I'd watch the chameleons kind of change color. I'd find weaver birds' nests with blue eggs. I'd watch ant colonies, just kind of observing how ants worked and operated, come across a snake skin. But most of all, I loved riding my bike. And in the afternoon, Shosho would take a siesta, because there wasn't really much going on before everybody started coming back into the house. So on this one particular afternoon, I'm outside riding my bike, not too far away from Shosho's quarters, and the watchman came up to me, and he said, "Come with me, I want to show you my box." So here I am, Wanja, and I was like, "What's that?" And he was like, "Come, let me show you." So he took me down to a remote part of the garden, and he sexually abused me. And in that moment, what he said to me was, "This is our secret, and if you tell anybody, you're going to get into trouble. So do you promise that you're not going to tell anybody?" And I said, "Yes." I felt trapped. I felt sullied. I felt confused. I felt alone and scared. And I felt bad. I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where you don't quite know what it is, but it's really bad and you're in it. And that's how I felt. So this happened 2 or 3 times more. Before Shosho figured out, she realized that there was something off. And when she finally had irrefutable evidence, she was like, "What is going on, and who is it? Who's doing this to you?" And I told her. And she said, "When your mom comes home, I'm going to tell her." And this for me was it just went into my stomach. Because I didn't know what she was going to tell her. I didn't know what I was going to tell her. I didn't know what she was going to tell me. I had no idea what was going to happen because of this incident, this situation. So my mom came home at about 5 o'clock. And I could hear, if I was listening out for my mom, I could hear her car, her Volvo, the brakes, screeching down the road, approaching the gate. And of course, on this day, the only thing that I was sitting there waiting for was for her to get home. So I hear the brakes and I take off into the coffee farm close by. And the whole thing was that I just wanted to disappear. I just wanted to disappear. And I was short enough to sort of be hidden by the coffee bushes. And I ran and ran until I freaked out because I was like, okay, I'm in the coffee farm by myself. So I came back to the house and she sat me down and she said, so what happened? And I told her what happened. And the next morning, first thing in the morning, we went to the gyno, got checked out, and all I could hear were these whispers, like, she's okay, yeah, she's going to be okay. You sure? Yeah, she's going to be okay. The watchman, I didn't see him again, and that was laid to rest. But for me, what had appeared in my life was the monster of shame. On that very first day, I had this monster of shame that sat on my neck, on my head, that jumped into bed when I got tucked in at night, that showed up in my nightmares. So, to compensate for this, when I went into Standard 1, and from that time on, really, I became really bookish. Like, I loved to read. So my home books, my kind of me books, were like The Magic Faraway Tree, books where I could sort of escape into this fantasy land and occupy my mind with that, as opposed to this constant presence of this monster that was telling me that I was unworthy, that I was inadequate, that I was just bad, that I was wrong. In school, I was that 98, 99, 100% kind of girl. So I just excelled. I was an athlete. And this was my way of compensating because I had to be good at something. I had to have something that showed that I really was a good kid. And all the while, with its noose around my neck, was this monster kind of telling me that I wasn't good enough. Socially, as a child, when people would come over with their kids, I'd just make myself scarce. Because I had this voice in my head, what if they find out, and what are they going to say, and if they know? So I would just sort of disappear. Not make myself available to be disgraced. And so I went into high school. High school, I made a switch. So I went from a predominantly African school to a predominantly white school, which in itself was a bit of a trauma. But the thing with post-traumatic stress is something happens and it's amplified. So I'd smoked my first cigarette at the age of 14. I'd had my first drink and gotten smashed at the age of 14. These were sort of tools that I used to be cool and not allow anybody to see this vulnerable person inside. I went to college. I went to a Seven Sisters, Anasakata, Bryn Mawr, which was great because it taught me to be a strong woman. I had my first job. I had my first heartache. And relationships in general were really hard for me. I always picked the guy that would show me, prove to me, almost like in cahoots with the monster, that I really was unworthy. So the guys that would cheat, would have girlfriends on the side, wouldn't actually really see me. And to be fair, I think that there was this huge part of me that I wouldn't presence. There was a huge part of me that I'd sort of just put aside and decided to forget about, starting from the age of 4 or 5. So when I think about it, I wonder if these guys really felt like they knew me. So through high school, college, first job, and I was performing. The thing is that I had this insatiable need to keep performing so that my flawed self wouldn't be seen. So by 25, I was a chartered financial analyst. I'd gotten into Columbia Business School. I had my own tea business in New York by the age of 27. And I worked my tail off. Everything looked great on the outside, but this monster was sort of like just chipping away at this hole in my soul, just making it bigger and bigger. So my dear friend, who I shared an office with, we shared an office in New York, Jewish-American guy, came to work on a Monday, and he's like, hey, Wanja, there's this thing, and I think you should check it out. You just check it out. I think it'll be good for you. So being Mitchell, who I trusted, I was like, okay, I'm going to check it out. And what it was this forum. And for the first time in all of those years, in a room full of strangers, in a safe space, I got to talk about what had happened. And the whole format with that forum was, what happened and what did you make it mean? So I got to talk about what I had made it mean. And this was the beginning of my healing journey, which took years. I went to all sorts of therapies: talk therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, art therapy, yoga, theta healing, Reiki, you name it. Anything that I felt could help me, I did it. I spent time with Jesuit priests. And if I were to summarize it all, what I was doing, or what all of this did for me, was get me to love myself. What it did for me was unpeel all this stuff that I had told myself about myself and come to a place of self-acceptance, such that I'd look in the mirror and be like, I really like you. I really like who you are. Once that was done, I had to then go back and heal my inner child, my 5-year-old little me, wee me. And I remember thinking about my inner child in my mind's eye. And when I sort of found her, she was in a closet like this, with the doors shut. And it took a lot of work to convince her that I love her, and to convince her to trust me, to let her know that I wouldn't abandon her. Because when this stuff happened, I basically banished her from my heart. So finally, having slayed this monster, and I slayed the monster actually with hypnotherapy. Hypnotherapy just slayed the monster dead, gone. And it gave me the space to pick up that little Wanja and put her on my shoulders. And this is what I could see in my mind's eye. My little me, sort of like happy and free. The person that she used to be before all of this happened. And on my shoulders, I kind of showed her the world that I'd come to see. Because I'd done so many things in my life. I'd been to so many places. And I walked her through that. All the relationships that I'd formed, the new tribes I'd formed, all the things that I'd learned.